Ghost in the Machine by Patrick Carman. Saturday, September 25th, 9:30 a.m. It was Henry. Bonner pulled off the mask and it was Henry underneath. I didn't even realize the camera had stopped. I think I was in shock. That's Sarah writing in my journal. We're back home now. Keep telling the story until I turn the camera on again. The most interesting thing about the look on my dad's face when he realized his best friend was in the dredge at 3:30 a.m. was not his confusion. Sure, he was confused. Who wouldn't be? It was the recognition in his eyes that something was very wrong. It was the hint of an idea that Henry might have put me and Sarah at risk, might have even tried to harm us. The wheels were turning in his head, I can tell you that. A son knows when his dad is onto something. Bonner checked Henry's pulse. He was in bad shape, but he was conscious. His leg was shattered. I knew how Henry felt and how long it was going to take him to recover. He was in for a long, painful ride. When Henry glanced at the faces hovering over him in the dredge, he knew he was caught. Dad looked like he was going to kill him. Henry lay there, broken leg and all, and started to deny, but my dad kept shaking his head slowly, saying, "Just tell me the truth for once." And that was it. Henry was ready for it to be over. He was finally ready for all the secrets to come out after 20 long years. Holding back that kind of tide must get very tiring. Henry would say something, then my dad would fill in a blank, then me or Sarah, until all of the parts were flying around the dredge, together in one place at last. Henry was the only person besides Francis and the Apostle who ever saw Joe Bush move the lever and reveal the secret room. He discovered the secret room and the dredge was still tearing everything apart and forming Skeleton Creek. Henry had suspected the three men were stealing gold. Who wouldn't at least try? In fact, making sure gold wasn't being stolen was one of Henry's primary jobs on his frequent visits from New York. There was no way of knowing how much gold should be coming out of the ground, which made it impossible to gauge with any kind of accuracy whether gold was missing. Henry had to sneak up on them, and that's exactly what he did. In the middle of the night on a scorching hot August 14, even in pain, even so much later, he remembered the date. Henry got in the lake of water the dredge floated in, swam over amid the pounding noise, and boarded. Dripping wet from head to toe, he watched as Joe Bush moved a handle that didn't seem to have any purpose. The thing that made me the angriest the whole time Henry was talking about this was that it seemed like he'd never, ever liked Skeleton Creek or anyone in it. From beginning to end, that had always been an act. This, for me, was an unforgivable deception. He only came back again and again for one reason. You got it, Sarah. Gold. It was only ever about getting his greedy hands on the gold, but finding the secret room was only part of the puzzle. It would take a lot more than that to get what he wanted because old Joe Bush was a really smart guy who loved Skeleton Creek. Henry didn't actually say this. We figured it out this morning. We haven't slept. And Ryan's dad finally started talking. Yeah, Joe Bush created layers of secrecy within an organization he founded when the dredge showed up in town, the Crossbones. Its charter members were the three men who worked the night shift together on the dredge, Joe Bush, the Apostle, and Francis Palmer. Only those three were aware of the location or even the existence of the secret room. The three were absolutely sworn to secrecy, and together they recruited Dr. Watts, Gladys Morgan, and my dad, Paul McCrae. Dr. Watts and Joe created the formulas for purifying and melting gold, but Dr. Watts never knew anything about a secret room. He was content to do the chemistry with Joe and keep up the dirty details of stealing gold. Joe gave the combination to the cryptics, to my dad and Gladys, but no one else. They had no idea a secret room had been created or even why, and everyone in the Crossbones was given one primary objective: to save the town from the evil of the dredge. In due time, when Joe was ready, all the members would know every secret, but he knew that would wait a long time, at least until the dredge was shut down for good. There was one big problem. Old Joe Bush might have been smart as a whip, but he wasn't impervious to accidents. According to Henry, but then how much can we really trust him? Old Joe Bush really did die by accident. He really was pulled into the gears by the cuff on his pants. His leg was smashed and the gears spit him out into the water below, just like the legend said. And it happened the night after Henry discovered the secret room. Only Joe knew every important detail: the existence of the secret room he'd made, where it was, the combination to unlock the cryptics, and the alchemy formula for processing the gold, the way he'd secretly done it. Henry went straight to Francis Palmer when he could no longer turn to Joe for answers. He threatened Francis with losing his job, but Francis didn't know anything Henry didn't already know. He knew Joe spent hours and hours in the secret room. He knew where the secret room was, but that was it. So Henry questioned Francis mercilessly, and as he told it, accidentally killed him. The same was true for the Apostle. Henry said it was something like this. They were all accidents. I never meant to hurt anyone. I scuffled with Francis up there and he fell. And that crazy apostle, I dunked him in the river, but I didn't drown him. He just slipped out of my hands and drifted downstream in the dark. It wasn't my fault he couldn't swim. As far as Henry was concerned, very little was ever his fault. After the apostle died, the remaining members of the Crossbones fell quiet for years. Dr. Watts, Gladys, and my dad all went on with their daily lives. Between the three of them, they had no idea a secret room even existed. They only had a hunch there was some gold hidden somewhere, and that someone had killed their friends in search of it. Best to leave well enough alone. Year after year, Henry came back searching for clues. He was sure there was a stash of gold somewhere on the mountain, and he was convinced the cryptics contained a map that would tell him where to look if only he could unlock it without blowing himself up. On one of Henry's visits, some kids were sneaking around the dredge, and he chased them off. After that, he needed a plan to keep snooping thrill seekers away from the dredge, so he created the ghost of old Joe Bush. 11 months out of every year in New York gave him plenty of time to figure things out. Every year he added a few more subtle touches: underground speakers, remote switches for sounds, iridescent masks and hoods, invisible trip wires that let him know when someone was heading down the trail toward the dredge. He even had his own secret shortcut through a seemingly impenetrable fortress of blackberry bushes. Things were different with me and Sarah. Number one, we were persistent. I was persistent. What's this we stuff? Like I was saying, we were persistent, but there was one thing that tipped Henry off that I didn't know about until he mentioned it. Sarah had been going to the dredge and filming it for weeks before the first video she showed me. She'd already been inside, already scouted around for hours, and here's one of the weirdest parts of the whole story. Henry had surveillance cameras set up inside and outside the dredge. Not only could he keep an eye on it from a laptop he carried with him, he could also watch it from New York, and watch it. He did. Years of watching the dredge turned Henry into quite the technician with this sort of thing. If a person walked past certain places in the woods on the way to the dredge, they unknowingly set off alerts all the way out in New York. The best I can understand it, there were wire pads buried a foot underground, and they were sensitive to pressure. If someone walked on the trail, Henry knew they were coming. And so it was that by the time Henry arrived in Skeleton Creek, he'd watched Sarah with her camera. He'd seen her visiting the dredge, not once but several times, recording all kinds of things. It worried him enough to put his well-worn scare tactics into high gear when he showed up in Skeleton Creek. Henry was also growing bolder because of all that talk about burning down the dredge. He didn't know who else was in the Crossbones, but he was sure there were others. He'd seen little hints here and there from my dad, and there was that one night when I fell asleep at my desk and woke up with the words scribbled on my wall with a pen. I had that list. The list of everyone we discovered was in the Crossbones. It was that list that set Henry to see Dr. Watts when he said he was visiting a friend. He had an excuse for that night, too. I didn't mean to kill Dr. Watts. I forced my way in. That much is true. And I questioned him. I knew he had answers, but the old loon wouldn't tell me anything. I only swung one time, caught him right in the head, but he made me so mad, all clammed up like that. He was frail, more so than I realized. I'm sure he died of a heart attack, not that little bump on his head. I guess you could say Henry's confession was tempered with lots of excuses. At least he didn't do much complaining when it came to his own severe injuries. Did you write those words on my wall? I asked him. What words? What are you talking about? Dad asked. He was already mad, but the idea of Henry in my room writing on my walls brought his anger to another level. Henry just looked down at his broken leg and wouldn't answer. He couldn't bring himself to look at my dad, and I never knew for sure if it had been Henry or not. Finally, Henry just about passed out from the pain. Bonner called the hospital for an ambulance, and I got the camera working again. There was at least one more big surprise waiting for us on the dredge, but this part is better seen than said. You have to watch this video. Come back here when you're done and we'll wrap things up. SarahFincher.com. Password: New York Gold and Silver.